First News with Keeler in the morning on WIBX and WIBX950.com.
I think we were all shocked when we saw the verdict came back yesterday afternoon and guilty on all three counts. Scott McNamara is on the line right now. Good morning.
Good morning, Bill.
So what did you think yesterday? Were you surprised when that came back so quickly?
I was very surprised that it came back so quickly. I was surprised that the jury never asked the judge to clarify anything, too. Normally in a trial, almost every single trial, the jury will send a note out and ask the judge to read back something, either to read back testimony. But almost always they ask the judge to re-explain the law to them. So I was kind of surprised that didn't happen. I was a little bit surprised that it didn't. They didn't get hung up on certain things. But.
Yeah. So yesterday, I think you had said that you would not be surprised even with a hung jury.
Right.
So that meant this morning I have some people piping in saying, well, that you disagree with guilty on all three counts. But I'm not sure that's what you said, though. Maybe
is not what I said. What I was telling, first of all, I think you and I both mentioned the fact that I didn't watch any of the trial.
Right, yes.
So I don't know what the evidence was. I only know what I saw on the news. So I was not predicting a verdict. I was just saying that from what I saw, which is a clip of the police officer kneeling on the person's neck and using my common sense in our state, and that is I don't believe that you would be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he intended to kill him. In New York State, murder, see, the difference is in different states, things are defined differently. So in New York State, a murder is the intentional taking of somebody's life. A murder in the first degree is the intentional taking of someone's life and having one of 13 aggravating factors. In New York State, our murder in the second degree does have two subdivisions that don't require intent. One is what's called depraved indifference murder. In our state, the courts have basically held that you can't have a depraved indifference murder only in very limited circumstances where you have one intended victim. So in our state, the courts have basically said, the Oklahoma City bombing or driving your car into a crowd or shooting into a crowd with no intent to kill one person, but with a total disregard of where that bullet's going to hit.
Yeah.
But they've said that in our state, one victim like George Floyd would not be a depraved indifference murder, most likely. You're definitely going to have a legal battle. The other one is felony murder, which is during the course of committing a felony, you kill the person, and it has to be one of the enumerated felonies. In our state, kneeling on somebody's neck like that would clearly be an assault, but there would be, to make it into a felony, you'd have to say he intended to cause his death or he was serious physical injury.
Yeah.
I don't know you could do that, and their state law is different.
It is different. When the judge read what each of the charges meant, and I think the prosecution did the same thing. It was very interesting yesterday because I felt like they were definitely describing a different charge than our murder charges that we have discussed on the air. So it almost seemed like it was closer to manslaughter, but being called a murder charge because none of those charges required intent. And
none of them required intent.
Nope.
And I've said that many times when I've given speeches that people have to keep in mind that what New York State laws are and what other state laws are different. It always comes to a head when there's a homicide, a high-profile homicide, and people local people get very upset that we don't charge murder in the first degree. And I try to explain to them it doesn't fit.
Right.
But they see it on TV or like this case, a perfect example. I think one of them is called murder in the third degree. We don't have murder in the third degree.
Right. Yeah.
So
it was very. I
was not predicting a verdict. What I was saying is, in our state, it looks like a manslaughter. In our state, manslaughter is different too. We have two different types of manslaughter. We have manslaughter in the first degree, which is with the intent to cause serious physical injury, you cause death. The facts that we watched there, and I don't know, maybe they had more evidence, but you would have to prove that his intent was to cause serious physical injury. Serious physical injury in our state is death, protracted disfigurement, or protracted loss of an organ.
Right.
I don't think you could
agree.
prove that.
I don't think that could be proven.
I wasn't saying what the verdict was going to be. Anybody that knows me, I can't predict the verdicts in our own county. I sure can't do it.
and that 9 minutes, that 9.5 minutes of video was just, one of the most.
It was the most compelling piece of evidence that the prosecution had.
As Janine Pirro said on Fox News last night, that we've never seen evidence like this before. We just witnessed a person alive and having his life taken away, and we watched the whole thing happen. It became evidence in the trial.
Absolutely. I saw her give that interview, and it's true. I wouldn't agree with her. We've never seen evidence like that before. We do a lot now because of body-worn cameras. We do see evidence that we never saw before. And I got to say, the fact that police officers wear body-worn cameras now really is changing the way we prosecute cases, but it's also changing the behavior on the streets of the police officers. And, it's a tough job, though. I'm not going to go, I don't agree with what Chauvin did. There's no reason. First of all, it was way too long. Right. Let's just be, if it was a couple seconds, but I will say this much, because of the Chauvin case, we've had incidents locally where a police officer will do something and the other police officers around that police officer say, knock it off, you don't do that.
Yeah, interesting.
They don't go anywhere. They stay right away from the neck.
Yep.
They stay away from chokeholds. They stay. So, in a way, there's never any good when it comes out of somebody dying. There's no, but when you look at what it's done, it's really put a lot of people on notice, and I including myself. I didn't know that you could die from pinning somebody's neck to the ground.
Right.
And I think maybe police knew that from their training. I don't know. I've never had police training, but I will say this much: everybody knows now.
Yeah.
Stay away from the neck. You got to be careful that the person isn't put in a situation where they can't breathe. And I know the training has changed. Mm-hmm. The things that scare me is like for instance, there's a lot of talk now is like, well, let's stop enforcing traffic infractions. Let's stop, take guns away from police. Unfortunately, the police job itself is a very dangerous job. They don't wear guns. I don't believe they wear guns because they want to have to use them. They wear guns because they need them to protect themselves in a dangerous situation.
Yeah.
And I just, I think, and like I will listen to the debate about traffic tickets. Well, let me tell you something. There's nobody that would benefit more by the police not writing traffic tickets out than me. It's a lot of work.
Especially right now.
Four people, that's all they do all day.
Yep.
And myself spend a lot of time on it. But then you look at, like, for example, for myself, why do I care about traffic tickets? I care about traffic tickets because you're trying to keep the road safe. It's not about raising revenue.
Right.
You hear all this nonsense. It's about keeping you, your children, and like myself, my grandchildren, everybody that uses the roads. You don't want people running stop signs or running red lights because they don't feel like stopping, because it causes accidents.
Right.
There's almost an accident a day in New Hartford. Now that we're doing it as one unit, you get to see all these accidents. There are a lot of traffic accidents. We're fortunate because cars are built better so you can survive accidents. But I think things change, and I think things need to change. We don't throw the baby out with the bath.
No doubt. The defunding, and I get it. To put funding into mental health is important, but to think that we're going to have a police-free society is just a ridiculous thought. And the other part of this is that this deed by this one officer, and the fact that the other two didn't step in is pretty alarming as well. But that this one
is. But the reality of policing is when you have a veteran The police, they're military type of. It's a military organization. You know, paramilitary organization. You don't challenge authority in that type of situation. You don't challenge superiors or senior people. Maybe that'll change because of this, but the reality is, I've watched. You get a rookie; he's not going to tell the guy that's been there 20 years, you can't do that.
And
he'll be laughed out of the police department.
Well, imagine how this scenario would go. He was a rookie. He was, I believe, that was his first week on the job. Can you imagine if he'd have stopped Chauvin? George Floyd lives. Now, you never know. You never even think that George Floyd could have even died. Now this guy gets fired because he's interfered in and put everyone in danger. This guy would have been fired. He would have lost his job, and maybe George Floyd would have lived, but we never would have known the story of what could have happened.
Right, and people get all crazy when they hear people say things like that. Oh, but here's the reality: if you had an intern come to work with you today, and in the middle of your show came in and say, "Oh, Bill, you're doing that all wrong. I learned in class this." You would be looking at this person going, "Stay in your lane."
I've seen something similar like that before.
I can't. Has someone told you about the incident in here? Apparently,
talking about that conference room meeting.
We don't want to get into that. Let's just say it ended very abruptly. It just came to a real close.
For one party.
Yeah. All right. And then finally, I just want to say there was a little bit of surmise. I realize you didn't see the evidence and you didn't watch the trial, and I didn't really either. I mean, I watched certainly more than you watched, but my schedule allows for that. But I think that based on what they were going after in terms of these three charges, that you have 12 jurors. I think that I was anyway, thinking there's going to be at least one juror there that's going to...
One holdout.
That's going to be the holdout. There's no way this thing's going to be done quickly. That's how I felt.
That's kind of how I felt, just only because of my experience. When you pick a jury, and unlike some of the people that, if you've never done it, you don't understand it. But I've picked a lot of juries myself. My office has picked a lot of juries. No matter how hard you try, there's always one person that either doesn't like the police or doesn't like the prosecution. In this case, it's very unique because the people that don't like the police, in a way, are the ones that you want as jurors.
Right.
Generally, we don't want those people. We don't want the people that hate the prosecution, and so maybe that's why it was so quick. And I failed to take that into consideration. But you always have one person that doesn't see it the same way you do, and that's the person you have to convince, even when the evidence is overwhelming. And clearly, in this case, having a videotape of it happening, there's no question of what happened. It's just what's he responsible for. So then it becomes more of a legal thing, and I'm sure they'll appeal it, and and that's gonna I heard on the thing, well, there's no appeal. I don't know what goes on in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
In New York, you get an appeal as of right. You don't even have to convince anybody. You can just appeal it. So you can appeal the length of the sentence. You can appeal. You could appeal the issue where that there was outside influence by what the
Maxine Waters or whatever.
Yeah, Maxine Waters said. You could make the argument, and if I was on the defense, I would make the argument what I was talking about before, that the depraved indifference doesn't fit. They're going to make those arguments. I don't know how successful they'll be. Once again, I can't answer that, and I hope the listeners understand. I have no knowledge whatsoever how liberal or conservative the highest court in Minnesota is, or the intermediate. Like I can guess based on my practice here in New York, how our courts see things, because we study the law and we study their decisions. But I've never even read a Minnesota case since I've been in law school. So, I have no idea about the likelihood of success, or I don't even know, if they've went down the same road our state has with the depraved indifference. Maybe in their state, that's clearly okay. In our state, it's not, so, But I will say, I mean, he's clearly guilty of taking his life, and it's just a question of what is his culpability or what's his accountability, and it depends on a lot with the state law.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's been certainly very. Every time there's one of these cases, I think we as a society learn an awful lot about the law, and I think there have been a lot of lessons that have come out of this policing, and we all are probably a little better off with the knowledge that we come out of this thing, I guess. Sadly,
yeah,
but that's the case.
Definitely.
All right, Scott, fascinating stuff. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Have a great day, Scott McNamara, the Oneida County District Attorney. After the show, but it was shocking though to see after the jury was questioned. Each member was individually questioned. The prosecution asked for the bail to be revoked. The judge granted that, and a sheriff deputy walked up and put him in handcuffs, and he was taken off.
Yeah.
And if you noticed, he'd written on his hand, Chauvin had written on his hand the telephone number of his attorney, fearing that by the time he was put into the orange gear or whatever they use for their jails, that piece of paper could have been taken from him.
Yeah.
So he wrote it on his hand so he'd have his attorney's number. That was a pretty dramatic moment, gotta say.